Hello and welcome to the SAP Data Dirt series, episode 3, where we will look at the SAP operational data provisioning context, specifically the SAPI context. The SAPI context is often referred to as the BW extractors. Those type of data sources or extractors have been around for a long time with the introduction of SAP BW basically. And a lot of customers are using BW extractors to get data out of SAP into BW or into any other data platform. Many customers have built a lot of content on those extractors as well. So it's really good to see that those extractors can still be used for today's modern data platforms in the cloud as well. There are other contexts as well, so you can use ODP and then connect to CDS views or to HANA calculation views or BW objects or even SLT. I hope to talk about those topics in due time, but today we concentrate on the SAPI extractors or the BW extractors. So let's take a look at those SAPI or BW data sources. Every data source in the system has properties. The first thing to look at is whether a data source is SAP delivered, or if something is custom built, or if something is extended, meaning it's delivered by SAP, but then additional fields have been added to the data source. The data source is can be based on a table or a view directly, so that's a very straightforward data source. It could also be built on a function module. So you have ABAP code providing the dataset for you, or something that's called info sets. We won't be looking at info sets today, but I will show you in the system data sources based on tables and data sources based on function modules. Other properties are around the delta mechanism, so whether it's delta enabled and what kind of delta is used for this data source. There are many different kinds of delta. I'm not going to go through those all, but I will post this URL in the description below. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of data sources available in a SAP system. It's quite difficult to find the documentation actually, but I dug out a link here, which I will also put in the description below. There is one set of data sources which have a very different behavior compared to all the other data sources. They're not simply built on a table or on a function module. There is bespoke SAP coding that manages these data sources. What they have in common is that they all delta-enabled data sources on quite complex data sets for logistics, for sales, for other areas as well. They are almost in, or they can be used in an almost real-time scenario, and they've got quite a clever mechanism running in the background where SAP in real time populates staging tables, and then at the time of extraction, the calling application just needs to read from the staging tables instead of going and collecting the data from all the original source tables. If you want to know more about those logistics extractor, there's another link there with some documentation I will share as well. The SAPI data sources can be customized as well. So if you have a SAP delivered data source, you can still add your own fields to those data sources. You may need to write some code then as well to make sure those fields are populated when you get the data extract. I'll briefly touch on that subject, but again, if you want to take a deep dive in customizing extractors, here's another blog post which explains that in a lot of detail. Let's have a look at the data source definitions in SAP. So here I am in the SAP system, and I will have a look at a data source definition by going to transaction code RSA2. The data source to look at, let's start with a simple one for just some text. There we go. Display. Okay, on the general tab, there is some metadata information, the name, the application component. The more interesting properties you find on the extraction tab. So the first thing you find is what is the extraction method. There's a long list of methods available. The very first one is the simple method of looking at a table directly, but there are more complex methods, looking at a domain function module in different ways. You can use an ABAP query or other methods as well. In this case, the method is a table, and the table name is here. So double click on this will actually take me to the table definition. And I can even look at the table contents. So these are the texts that are interfaced by this data source. Going back to the data source definition, what else is there? There is an extract structure, so that's the field definition of this data set. It's a very simple data set here, but this is the field definition. And then there is the definition of the delta process as well. Again, many different options here. There is a blog post. I have put the URL in the comments at the bottom of this video. I'm not going to go through all of these right now. Finally, you see the field definition within the extractor and which fields can be used for selection when you require a new data set from this data source. Okay, a different example to look at the a data source using a function module. There are thousands of data sources in the system, so I'm using a wildcard to find an example here. I'll go straight to the extraction tab. Here you can see that the extraction method is function module, and the function module itself is here, so I can double click on that. It takes me to the function module definition. Somewhere in this function module is a select statement to get the data set. So here it is. And then that data set can be modified in the function module by this ABAP code. You can create your own function modules as long as you have your input parameters and your export parameters defined correctly. You can just create your own function module for your own data source if you want to. The last example I have is an example of the logistics extractors. So again, there's quite a long list of logistics extractors. I'll just pick one here from the list. Again, the interesting tab is the extraction tab, where in this case, you see something funny. So the extractor is an ODP extractor, and it should show us, we're in the realms of object-oriented programming here. So there are methods with ABAP code, and If you want to, you can try and unpick this code. I wouldn't recommend it because there will be reams and reams of code to provide this data set for you. Okay. Okay, so those are the data sources and the data source properties. Okay, so we've seen the data source definitions. Let's have a look at how we can test the actual data sources in the SAP system itself. This is quite useful to know when you have a third-party system and you get data from SAP and you expect something has gone wrong along the way. It is useful to know whether the extraction on the SAP side went wrong or if it's something further downstream that has gone wrong. So a very simple test you can do in transaction code RSA3. Okay, so in RSA3, you can specify the name of the data source you would like to test. You can put in selection criteria. For example, in this case, if you just want English, you can put the language key and then run the extraction and you get your data set. In this case, a very simple data set, but you can see that the text is successful. And as I said, that's really useful for troubleshooting. So now we've seen the different properties of the extractors. We have seen how you can test an extractor. I would briefly like to look at some aspects of the logistics extractors. The logistics extractors are there to work with the most complex data sets in SAP. So the logistic extractors gather information from a lot of different tables for you and present that into one logical data set for you. There is a very special delta mechanism available that helps to handle large volumes in near real time. But there is some initial configuration required and it's not so straightforward. So I would recommend, if you are planning to use these, to involve someone with SAP expertise in configuring logistics extractors rather than trying to figure this out on a rainy afternoon. The basics are in what's called the logistics cockpit. So in SAP, the logistics cockpit is in transaction code LBWE. Here you find the different application areas for logistics extractors. The numbering is part of the naming convention of the actual extractors. So here we have 2 LIS 11 for sales, and then the actual dataset name. In purchasing, you find 2 LIS 02 and then the name of the dataset. For each different application area, there has to be a job configured to prepare the data for you. You have to specify and configure the update method. And finally, you can check what kind of events would trigger a delta update for a specific data set. Okay, the configuration of all of this is explained in a blog that is at the bottom of this video. Last topic is a little bit about customizing extractors, meaning that you can add your own field to an existing data source, but then you also have to put in the logic to populate those fields. I'm not going to go through this step by step. Here is a blog post which does do that for you, but just a brief introduction on the system here. In RSA 6, you can see all the data sources that are available for you in the system. I will browse to one that is quite often used, the material data source, to get material properties. When you take a closer look at that data source, You can see the field list that's associated with this data source, which fields are passed through, which fields are hidden. And you can also see which fields are marked for selection. Now, there is a way to add fields to this field list. I'm not going to show you how that's done here. Read that blog that I have in the comments down here. You can add additional fields, and when you do that, you have to tell SAP how those fields need to be populated. So you have to implement some logic yourself as well. I think it's good that you are aware you can add fields to standard data sources in case you do need it. Again, the how-to is a different topic for a different day. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope I have demystified the ODP contexts for you, at least the SAPI or the SAP BW extractor context. So you learned a little bit about the different data sources in the system, different types of data sources, how you can see the details of how a data source is defined and set up, how you can test the data source, how you can customize your data sources. And we also had spent a little bit of time on the special extractors for the logistics cockpit. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you found it useful, and yeah, let me know if you want to know more about any of the other ODP contexts, and I will try and do my best to put another video on this channel. Thank you for watching.